I was 27 when I learned that the loudest revenge isn't a scene. It's a spreadsheet. It's a time-stamped email chain. It's knowing exactly which federal form to file, which regulatory body has jurisdiction, and how to preserve a paper trail so airtight that the people who tried to bury you end up tripping over their own footnotes. The company was called Aura and Ivy, one of those millennial-targeted wellness brands that sold $38 face serums in frosted glass and talked about radical transparency in their quarterly newsletters. I worked in quality compliance. My actual job was to make sure every ingredient matched the label, every batch passed stability testing, and every marketing claim didn't cross into illegal territory. But 3 months before our biggest launch of the year, the CEO's younger brother, Julian, got handed the VP title. He didn't know the difference between an INCI list and a grocery receipt, but he knew how to play golf with our investors. When I flagged that our clean, clinically tested moisturizer hadn't actually completed its required 90-day accelerated stability test, he called me into a glass-walled conference room, closed the door, and told me I was killing the momentum. He said it like it was a personal attack. When I pushed back, he laughed, leaned forward, and said, "Maya, you're 27. You'll figure out how to pick your battles before you price yourself out of a career." Then he walked me back to the open floor and announced, in that performative team meeting voice, that I'd be transitioning to administrative support until the launch wrapped. 20 people heard it. No one said a word. I felt my face burn, my chest tighten, and that familiar, heavy American corporate silence settle over the room. That was the moment I stopped being angry and started being precise. Revenge in your 20s usually looks like quitting dramatically, posting a blind rant on LinkedIn, or ghosting a toxic job and hoping karma does the heavy lifting. I've seen all three work for exactly 2 weeks before reality kicks in, but real accountability isn't emotional, it's procedural. I went home that night, didn't cry, didn't rage post, didn't even tell my best friend. I opened a new laptop I'd bought with cash, created a secure cloud folder, and started building what compliance professionals call a contemporaneous record. Every email I'd sent about the testing delay, every Slack message where Julian said just ship it, every internal memo that contradicted our public safety claims, I timestamped everything. I exported chat logs before it could wipe them. I photographed batch records with a personal camera, not my work phone. And then I did the one thing most people skip. I read the actual law. Under the FDA's Cosmetic Modernization Act and FTC Truth in Advertising Guidelines, companies are legally required to substantiate their safety claims before marketing them. Whistleblower protections exist for a reason, but they only work if you follow the rules of engagement. I didn't send screenshots to a gossip blog. I didn't tag the company in a viral TikTok. I compiled a formal, anonymous submission to the FDA's Voluntary Cosmetic Registration Program, cross-referenced it with FTC advertising guidelines, and routed a certified copy to our internal ethics hotline, knowing full well that once it hits an external regulator, the company loses control of the narrative. I didn't do it to burn them down. I did it to force them to stand up. The audit hit 6 weeks later, not with sirens or press vans, but with a quiet, methodical inquiry that froze our shipping pipeline. Regulatory holds don't look dramatic on the surface, but they bleed cash faster than a viral scandal. Investors pulled back. Retail partners paused orders. Julian tried to spin it as a supply chain delay, but the FDA doesn't negotiate with press releases. When the compliance review landed, the gaps were undeniable. Skipped stability testing, unverified ingredient substitutions, marketing language that crossed into unapproved drug claims. The company didn't collapse overnight, but it was forced to pull the product, issue a corrective statement, and restructure its leadership. Julian didn't go to jail. He got a strategic transition package and a quiet exit. The CEO kept his title but lost his board seat. And me? I didn't get a parade. I got a severance, a non-disparagement clause I politely declined to sign, and a quiet email from a senior compliance director at a competing firm who'd heard through regulatory channels that someone had handled a whistleblower submission by the book. That email led to a job with better pay, actual oversight authority, and a team that treated documentation like armor instead of paperwork. But the real victory wasn't the promotion. It was watching a system that rewards loud arrogance finally answer to quiet procedure. Here's what nobody tells you about workplace revenge. Burning the place down usually just burns the people standing closest to the exits. The real power isn't in making noise. It's in knowing which doors to open, which forms to file, and how to protect yourself while the truth does the heavy lifting. If you're ever in a position where leadership pressures you to cut corners, falsify records, or stay silent about something that could hurt consumers, your first move isn't confrontation. It's documentation. Save everything outside company servers. Use personal email for timestamp backups. Never delete or alter original files. Read the whistleblower protections under your industry's regulatory body, whether that's FDA, FTC, OSHA, SEC, or EEOC. File through official channels, not social media. Anonymous reporting is protected, but only if it's factual, verifiable, and rooted correctly. And never, ever confuse sabotage with accountability. Sabotage gets you sued. Accountability gets you heard. I didn't ruin that company because I was bitter. I forced it to comply because I was prepared. There's a difference. One is emotional, the other is enforceable. I'm 27 now, I still work in compliance. I still carry a notebook I never leave at my desk. I still read the fine print on every product launch, every marketing deck, every we're like family company memo. And when someone tries to tell me to pick my battles, I just smile, open my folder, and remember that the most dangerous weapon in corporate America isn't a viral post or a dramatic resignation. It's a paper trail, filed correctly, backed by law, and executed with patience. Revenge doesn't have to be loud to be lethal. Sometimes it just has to be accurate. And if you're learning this the hard way, take note. Document everything, root it right, protect your name, and let the system do what it's supposed to do. You don't need to break the rules to win. You just need to know them better than the people who think they're above them. The incident and the awakening, the thing about American corporate culture, is that it's built on a very specific kind of politeness. It's the kind that lets you smile while someone dismantles your credibility. It's the kind that wraps exploitation in words like alignment, synergy, and family. I didn't grow up thinking I'd end up in quality compliance for a skincare brand. I studied regulatory affairs because I liked structure. I liked knowing that there were rules that if you followed them, the system worked. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast, but it was real. And in an industry that sells self-care in pastel packaging, real is the hardest thing to find. Aura and Ivy wasn't a scam, not exactly. It was a carefully calibrated illusion. The founders were smart. They understood that modern consumers don't just want products, they want narratives. They want to feel like buying a serum is an act of self-respect. They want to believe that the company cares about clean ingredients, ethical sourcing, and scientific rigor. And for a long time, they delivered enough of that to keep the illusion intact. I was hired to maintain it, not to market it, not to sell it, to verify it. My title was Quality Compliance Specialist, which sounds boring until you realize it's the only thing standing between a brand and a federal recall. I spent my days cross-referencing ingredient lists with supplier certificates of analysis. I reviewed stability testing protocols. I made sure marketing claims didn't accidentally classify our cosmetics as unapproved drugs. I wasn't the face of the company. I was the firewall. Then Julian arrived. He wasn't brought in because he understood cosmetic regulation. He was brought in because he was the CEO's younger brother, because he had an MBA from a mid-tier business school, and because he knew how to talk to investors in a way that sounded confident without requiring technical depth. Within 2 months, he'd rebranded himself as VP of Product Acceleration. Within 3, he'd started using words like velocity, frictionless, and go-to-market optimization. He didn't ask questions. He gave directives. And when he realized that compliance slowed down his timeline, he decided compliance was the problem. The moisturizer in question was supposed to be our flagship winter launch. It was marketed as clinically tested, dermatologist-approved, and suitable for sensitive skin. The stability testing protocol required 90 days of accelerated aging under controlled temperature and humidity conditions. That's standard industry practice. It's not optional. It's how you prove a formula won't separate, degrade, or grow microbial contaminants before it reaches the customer. At day 42, Julian pulled me into a glass-walled conference room. The glass was frosted at the bottom for privacy, which meant everyone outside could see us talking but couldn't hear a word. That was intentional. He liked the theater of it. He closed the door, sat across from me, and said we needed to approve the batch for packaging. I told him the testing wasn't complete. I showed him the lab report. I explained that releasing it early violated our internal SOPs and opened us up to FTC and FDA scrutiny. He didn't argue the science. He didn't need to. He just leaned forward, smiled, and said, "Maya, you're 27. You'll figure out how to pick your battles before you price yourself out of a career. It wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was a dismissal. It was him telling me that my expertise didn't matter as much as his timeline. It was him telling me that in this company, momentum trumped accuracy. And when I pushed back one more time, he stood up, opened the door, and walked me back to the open floor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just announced, loud enough for the nearest 24 employees to hear, that I'd be transitioning to administrative support until the launch wrapped. He said it like it was a routine scheduling adjustment. He said it like I was being given a gift. And then he walked away. The room didn't gasp. No one stood up. No one asked what happened. In American corporate spaces, public humiliation is designed to be absorbed quietly. If you react, you're emotional. If you argue, you're difficult. If you leave, you're unstable. So you sit there. You feel your face burn. You feel your chest tighten. You feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes carefully avoiding yours. And you realize in that exact moment that the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended. It's designed to make you doubt yourself so you'll stop asking questions. It's designed to make you believe that speaking up costs more than staying silent. I didn't cry at my desk. I didn't pack my things. I finished my shift. I logged my time. I emailed my manager a neutral confirmation of the role change. I went home. And that night, I did something I'd never done before. I stopped trying to fix the problem from inside the system. I started preparing to expose it from outside. The shift wasn't sudden. It was surgical. I realized early on that emotional retaliation is easily dismissed. HR calls it unprofessional. Legal calls it defamatory. Leadership calls it drama. But procedural retaliation? That's unassailable. You can't argue with timestamps. You can't spin audit trails. You can't negotiate with federal guidelines. So I stopped being angry. I started being precise. And precision, I learned, is the quietest form of power there is. The architecture of a paper trail documentation is the backbone of compliance, but most people treat it like an afterthought. They think it's about filing forms or saving emails. It's not. It's about creating a defensible record that can survive legal scrutiny, internal investigations, and corporate spin. When I decided to build my case, I didn't just start saving files. I started building a structure. First, I established a secure external storage environment. I bought a dedicated laptop with cache. I created an encrypted cloud folder using a provider that offered zero-knowledge encryption, meaning not even the hosting company could access my files. I disabled automatic syncing on my work devices. I never logged into personal accounts on company hardware. These aren't paranoid habits. They're standard risk mitigation practices in regulatory work. Company IT monitors activity. They track file exports, cloud uploads, and external email forwards. If you're gathering evidence, you assume everything you do on company infrastructure is logged. So I kept the work clean. I did my job. I didn't alter, delete, or remove anything from internal systems. I only copied what was already accessible to me in the normal course of my duties. That's a critical legal distinction. Taking proprietary data you don't have access to is theft. Preserving records you're authorized to view is due diligence. Next, I built a chronological timeline. I exported every relevant Slack conversation, email thread, and internal memo. I didn't screenshot. Screenshots lack metadata. They're easily questioned in legal settings. Instead, I used platform export tools to generate native files with intact timestamps, sender/receiver information, and message IDs. I saved batch records, lab reports, and testing schedules. I photographed physical documents with a personal camera, ensuring the images captured full pages, page numbers, and any handwritten notes. I labeled every file using a consistent naming convention, date, subject, source format. It sounds tedious. It's not. It's what separates a coherent submission from a disorganized dump. Then came the contemporaneous journal. This is a compliance best practice that most people ignore. A contemporaneous record is a running log of events, decisions, and conversations, written as close to the time of occurrence as possible. It's not a diary, it's a factual ledger. I documented every verbal instruction, every meeting where testing delays were discussed, every instance where leadership dismissed compliance concerns. I recorded dates, times, attendees, and direct quotes when possible. I avoided speculation. I avoided emotional language. I stuck to observable facts. If Julian said just ship it, I wrote, VP instructed release of batch number 8842 prior to completion of 90-day stability protocol. I didn't write, Julian is reckless and doesn't care about safety. The first is admissible. The second is opinion. I also mapped the decision chain. Who had signing authority for product release? Who approved marketing claims? Who communicated with suppliers? Who managed quality assurance? I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was building an organizational flowchart that showed exactly where accountability broke down. In regulatory submissions, context matters. You don't just show what went wrong. You show who had the authority to prevent it, who ignored it, and who benefited from ignoring it. The hardest part wasn't the technical work. It was the psychological discipline. Every day, I sat at my desk doing administrative tasks while knowing I was sitting on a file that could trigger a federal inquiry. I had to maintain my performance. I had to avoid sudden behavior changes. I had to answer emails promptly. I had to attend meetings without flinching. Retaliation claims are strongest when the employee can demonstrate consistent professionalism before and after the protected activity. If you start slacking, missing deadlines, or acting erratically after filing a complaint, it gives the company grounds to claim performance-based termination. So I stayed sharp. I stayed quiet. I stayed prepared. And I learned something crucial. Documentation isn't about punishment. It's about alignment. When you document properly, you're not building a weapon. You're building a mirror. You're holding it up to a system and saying, here's what actually happened. Let the record show. And in corporate America, the record is the only thing that can't be talked out of. The regulatory landscape, knowing the law, is what separates effective accountability from reckless exposure. I didn't guess which agency had jurisdiction. I researched it. In the United States, cosmetic regulation is primarily post-market, meaning the FDA doesn't approve products before they hit shelves. But that doesn't mean there are no rules. The Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, MOCRA, signed into law in late 2022, significantly expanded FDA oversight. It mandates facility registration, product listing, adverse event reporting, and substantiation of safety claims. It doesn't require pre-market approval, but it does require that manufacturers have adequate safety substantiation before marketing. If you claim a product is clinically tested, dermatologist approved, or suitable for sensitive skin, you need data to back it up. Otherwise, you're making unverified claims, and that's where the FTC steps in. The Federal Trade Commission enforces truth in advertising laws. Their guidelines are clear. Claims must be truthful, not misleading, and substantiated by competent and reliable evidence before they're made. If a company markets a product as stable, safe, or scientifically validated without proper testing, it's a violation. It doesn't matter if the product isn't toxic. It matters that the marketing crosses into unverified territory. That's deceptive. That's illegal. That's reportable. I spent 2 weeks mapping our violations against federal guidelines. I cross-referenced our marketing deck with MOCRA requirements. I compared our internal testing logs with FTC substantiation standards. I reviewed supplier certificates against ingredient disclosure rules. I documented every discrepancy. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't infer, I matched facts to regulations, and then I drafted the submission. Whistleblower reporting isn't a free-for-all, it's a structured process. Anonymous reporting is protected, but only if the information is factual, specific, and rooted through official channels. I didn't send a PDF to a journalist. I filed through the FDA's voluntary cosmetic registration and adverse event reporting portal. I attached supporting documentation. I referenced specific regulatory sections. I avoided naming individuals unnecessarily. I focused on systemic failures, not personal grievances. I routed a certified copy to our internal ethics hotline, creating a paper trail that proved I attempted internal resolution before external escalation. That's critical. Many whistleblower protections require good faith internal reporting first. I covered that base. I also researched anti-retaliation statutes. Federal law prohibits employers from retaliating against employees who report violations in good faith. That includes termination, demotion, harassment, or constructive discharge. But protections only apply if the report is made through proper channels and based on reasonable belief of a violation. I made sure my submission met those criteria. I didn't speculate, I cited regulations. I provided verifiable data. I kept my tone professional. I didn't threaten. I didn't demand, I reported. The difference between sabotage and accountability is intent and method. Sabotage is deliberate harm. It's deleting files, spreading misinformation, or interfering with operations. Accountability is factual disclosure. It's following established reporting pathways. It's letting regulators do their job. I didn't want to destroy the company. I wanted it to comply. And in regulatory work, compliance isn't punishment, it's correction. It's the system working as designed. The filing and the wait filing the report took 47 minutes. The wait took 6 weeks. And those 6 weeks were the hardest part. Not because I was scared, because I was human. I second-guessed myself. I wondered if I'd overreacted. I questioned whether I should have just left quietly. I replayed Julian's words in my head. I worried about retaliation. I worried about blacklisting. I worried about being labeled difficult. But I also knew that if I walked away now, I'd be telling myself that precision doesn't matter. That rules are suggestions. That leadership gets to decide what's true. And I wasn't willing to believe that, so I stayed, I showed up, I did my work, I answered emails. I attended meetings, I smiled when appropriate. I didn't mention the filing, I didn't drop hints, I didn't act differently. I maintained performance, I kept records of my work output, I documented my interactions. I protected myself not through paranoia but through consistency, and I leaned on routine. I exercised, I cooked, I called my sister. I read books that had nothing to do with cosmetics or compliance. I kept my life anchored outside the office, because when you're carrying something heavy, you don't need to announce it. You just need to keep walking. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the hold hit. Not with drama, with email. Subject, regulatory inquiry, immediate action required. Body, all shipments for Q4 flagship line are paused pending documentation review. Compliance team to respond within 48 hours. I read it, I closed my laptop, I exhaled. It was happening, not because of me, because of the system, and that's exactly how it's supposed to work. The office shifted. Julian stopped walking the floor. Meetings got canceled. Legal counsel arrived in unmarked cars. PR drafted statements. Supply chain managers scrambled. The hold didn't look dramatic from the outside, but internally it was a freeze. Inventory couldn't move. Retailers couldn't restock. Investors got nervous. And the company realized very quickly that momentum doesn't override regulation. You can't spin your way past the FDA. You can't negotiate with the FTC. You either comply or you stall. And stalling costs money. Fast, I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I felt a quiet, heavy relief. Not because I'd won, because I'd been heard. And in a culture that rewards silence, being heard is the first step toward accountability. The audit and the aftermath regulatory audits don't look like movies. They're methodical. They're paper-heavy. They're slow. The FDA requested our testing logs, supplier certificates, internal communications, marketing approvals, and quality assurance records. We had 48 hours to respond. Legal spent 3 days compiling. I wasn't involved. I'd already done my part. I was just watching the machinery turn. When the review landed, the findings were clear. Skipped stability testing. Unverified ingredient substitutions. Marketing language that crossed into unapproved drug claims. No malicious intent, just negligence, just pressure, just the belief that speed mattered more than safety. And that's what makes regulatory failures so common. They're not usually about evil. They're about shortcuts. They're about leaders who think rules are optional if the timeline is tight. They're about cultures that reward results over rigor. The company didn't collapse, it adapted. They pulled the product, issued a corrective statement, restructured leadership. Julian received a strategic transition package. The CEO kept his title but lost his board seat. Retailers paused orders. Investors recalibrated. The brand survived, but it was changed. And that's how accountability works in corporate America. It doesn't always look like destruction. It looks like realignment. It looks like systems forcing themselves to comply. For me, it meant severance. It meant declining a non-disparagement clause. It meant packing my desk. It meant walking out through the same glass doors where I'd been humiliated months earlier. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt settled. I'd done what I was supposed to do. And the system had done what it was supposed to do. The career pivot and professional rebirth whistleblower experience doesn't ruin careers, it clarifies them. Within weeks, I received an email from a senior compliance director at a competing firm. They'd heard through regulatory channels that someone had handled a submission by the book. They wanted to talk. I interviewed. I was offered a role with better pay, actual oversight authority, and a culture that treated documentation as protection, not paperwork. I accepted. The transition wasn't seamless. I had to rebuild trust. I had to prove I wasn't disruptive. I had to show that my actions weren't personal but procedural. And I did. I brought the same rigor. I built the same systems. I protected the same standards. But this time I was supported. This time, leadership listened. This time, compliance wasn't an obstacle. It was infrastructure. And I learned the most important lesson of all: you don't have to break the system to fix it. You just have to operate within it correctly. You just have to know the rules. You just have to document them. You just have to file them. And when you do, the system responds. Not because it's moral, because it's designed to. The educational blueprint: if you're facing pressure to cut corners, falsify records, or stay silent, here's what you do. First, document everything externally. Use personal devices. Preserve metadata. Maintain contemporaneous logs. Second, research jurisdiction. Know which agency governs your industry. Read the guidelines. Match facts to regulations. Third, report through official channels. Anonymous is protected, but only if factual, specific, and properly rooted. Fourth, maintain performance. Don't give them grounds for retaliation. Stay professional. Stay consistent. Fifth, understand the difference between sabotage and accountability. One is emotional. One is enforceable. Choose wisely. Common mistakes: leaking on social media, violating NDAs, missing jurisdictional requirements, confusing internal HR with external agencies, acting erratically after filing. Avoid them, protect yourself. Let the record speak. Reflection and conclusion: revenge isn't about destruction. It's about alignment. It's about forcing a system to operate as designed. It's about proving that rules aren't suggestions, that standards aren't optional, that accountability isn't personal, it's procedural. I'm 27. I still carry a notebook. I still read the fine print. I still believe that precision is power. And when someone tells me to pick my battles, I smile. I open my folder. I remember that the most dangerous weapon in corporate America isn't a viral post. It's a paper trail, filed correctly, backed by law, executed with patience. You don't need to break the rules to win. You just need to know them better than the people who think they're above them.